My boyfriend announced calmly, like he was discussing the weather, "I'm moving in with my ex to co-parent better. You'll understand someday." I remember the exact moment my breath stopped. The kitchen light was still on. A half-empty mug of coffee sat between my hands, already cold. I looked at him, waiting for the punchline, for the laugh that would tell me this was a joke taken too far. I didn't get one. Instead, he continued, explaining it slowly, carefully, as if the problem wasn't what he was saying, but whether I was mature enough to hear it. His daughter needed stability, 2 parents under one roof. That's what was best for her. Not us, her. I heard my own voice answer, steady and polite, almost detached. Absolutely. Even now, I don't know where that calm came from. Maybe shock. Maybe the instinct that kicks in when something inside you understands, before your heart does, that the ground has already collapsed. I helped him pack. I folded his clothes with the same hands that had washed them for 2 years. I labeled boxes, I taped them shut, I carried pieces of my own life down the stairs and loaded them into a truck I paid for. When we arrived, his ex stood in the doorway, watching with a small smile that never reached her eyes. She thanked me. She hugged me. She told me how mature I was being. I smiled back. What none of them knew, what neither of them even considered, was that while I was being the perfect supportive girlfriend, I was also paying attention. Closets have stories. Papers talk. And when people are busy congratulating themselves on how clever they are, they get careless. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I drove away exactly when I said I would. But before I went home, I made one last stop. Their mailbox. What I left inside it didn't scream. It didn't threaten. It didn't lie. It simply told the truth. And within 48 hours, the perfect co-parenting arrangement collapsed so completely that his ex kicked him out of the house he'd just moved into. That was when the phone started ringing, and that was when they realized I hadn't been understanding at all. I'd been finished. Before everything imploded, before boxes, mailboxes, and phone calls at dawn, there was a version of my life that felt solid, ordinary, earned. I met Jason 2 years earlier at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. He arrived late, jacket slung over one shoulder, apologizing briefly as he pulled out the chair across from me. He had the quiet fatigue of a man carrying more responsibility than he let on. Halfway through the meal, he mentioned his daughter, Emma, casually, not as a warning, just a fact. I noticed he watched my reaction. I didn't flinch. Our first few dates were careful. Babysitters had to be booked. Plans shifted when Emma got sick or refused to sleep. Jason was upfront from the start. Dating him meant accepting that his life already revolved around a child. I respected that. I wasn't trying to replace anyone. I wasn't chasing a ready-made family. I just liked him. Emma took longer. At first, she stayed close to Jason, watching me with cautious curiosity. Then one evening, she handed me a plastic teacup and informed me I was invited to her tea party. That was the moment something shifted. Tea parties turned into bedtime stories. Bedtime stories turned into Saturday mornings on the living room floor, cartoons blaring far too early. Jason would sit nearby, coffee in hand, letting me handle cereal spills and mismatched socks. I learned which snacks Emma refused on principle and which ones she secretly loved. I learned her secret handshake. Jason noticed everything. "You don't have to do all this," he said once, watching me help Emma with homework. "I know," I replied. "I want to." When we moved in together, Emma got her own room. Jason insisted on it. Pink curtains, a star-shaped nightlight. I helped assemble the bed while Emma supervised like a tiny foreman. Jason stood back, arms crossed, pride flickering across his face. It felt real, not perfect, but stable. Emma's biological mother, Jason's ex-wife, was always present in the background. Pickups, drop-offs, texts at odd hours about school schedules and urgent issues that could have waited. Jason complained about her sometimes, about her inconsistency, her sudden demands, her habit of rewriting agreements. He framed it as frustration, not bitterness. I believed him. Looking back, I see how often Jason positioned himself in contrast to her. "I don't disappear," he said when he showed up early for pickup. "I keep my word," when schedules changed at the last minute. I put Emma first when conflicts came up. At the time, it sounded like responsibility. Now I understand it was narrative control. Still, my bond with Emma was real. When she had nightmares, she called for her dad, but she reached for my hand when she settled back down. When she learned to ride a bike, Jason ran behind her, breath heavy, refusing to let go too soon. I stood at the curb, cheering, heart tight with pride. More than once, Jason told me I was family. That's why, when he sat me down 3 weeks before everything collapsed, posture controlled, voice calm, I assumed it was about logistics, scheduling, school, boundaries with his ex-wife. I never imagined he was about to redraw his life in a way that quietly erased me from it. The first warning signs didn't arrive as explosions. They came as small adjustments, reasonable ones, the kind you don't question because questioning them would make you seem unreasonable. It started with schedule changes. Jason would glance at his phone during dinner, his jaw tightening slightly. Emma's mother needed to swap weekends. Something came up, a work shift, a family situation. Jason always agreed, always framed it as flexibility. "She's still adjusting," he said once, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I don't want to make things harder for Emma." I nodded. Of course. Emma first. That had become the unspoken rule of our household, and I supported it. Then the boundaries softened. Texts turned longer. Calls took place in other rooms. Jason stopped putting his phone face up on the counter. Not dramatically, just subtly enough that I noticed, then immediately told myself not to read into it. When I asked, casually, if everything was okay, he didn't get defensive. He got patient. "It's just co-parenting stuff," he said. "You know how complicated that can be." I did know, or at least I thought I did. The next shift came with language. "She's not comfortable with you at school events yet. She thinks it might confuse Emma if there are too many adults involved. Maybe sit this one out, just for now." Each request came with a soft tone, with reassurance attached. Temporary, transitional, best for the child. I told myself this was what maturity looked like. Still, something in my chest tightened every time I stayed home, while Jason took Emma to a school function I'd helped prepare her for. I folded the dress I'd ironed, turned off the light in her empty room, and reminded myself that I wasn't her mother. I didn't get to dictate terms. What unsettled me more was how Jason spoke after those visits. "She's finally seeing things my way," he said once, satisfaction threading through his voice. "She realizes I'm the stable one." There was pride there, relief, and something else I couldn't quite name. Money was the next thing that shifted. I found myself covering more without discussion. School supplies, extracurricular fees, groceries on weeks. Emma stayed longer. Jason didn't ask outright. He simply didn't stop me. "You're amazing," he said once, kissing my forehead after I paid for Emma's dance classes for the year. "I don't know how I got so lucky." I smiled, but the compliment sat oddly with me. Gratitude, yes, but also expectation. The first time I pushed back was small. "Do you think we should set clearer boundaries?" I asked one night, "just so things don't blur." Jason exhaled slowly, like a man choosing patience over irritation. "You're overthinking," he said. "This is just how co-parenting works. You'll understand more when you have kids." The words landed heavier than he intended. When you have kids, not our kids, not our future. A line drawn quietly, efficiently, across the life I thought we were building. After that, I started noticing patterns I couldn't unsee. How Jason always framed decisions as already made. How disagreement was recast as emotional immaturity. How compromise flowed in one direction. And how often the phrase, "you'll understand someday," appeared, always when I was being excluded. The real warning, though, came the night I overheard him on the phone. His voice was low, controlled, familiar. "No," he said, "she doesn't need to know everything. It'll just complicate things." I stood in the hallway, heart beating too loud, realizing that whatever was happening wasn't just about co-parenting anymore. It was about control, and I was slowly being written out of the narrative. He didn't choose a dramatic moment to tell me. No argument, no build-up, no raised voices. Jason waited until after dinner, until the dishes were drying on the rack and Emma was already asleep. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands folded, posture straight, like a man preparing for a meeting, not a conversation that would detonate my life. "I've been thinking a lot about Emma's well-being," he began. That sentence alone should have warned me. By then, it had become his shield, the phrase he used whenever a decision was already made. I looked at him, attentive, waiting. "Her mom and I talked," he continued. "We've decided it would be better for her if we lived together for a while, for co-parenting." The words didn't land all at once. They came in pieces, like something breaking underwater, muted, slow, unreal. I stared at him. "You're joking!" Jason didn't flinch. "I knew you'd react like this," he said calmly. "But it's not about us. It's about Emma. She needs both parents under one roof." My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I gestured around the room, the home we shared. "We live together," I said. Emma has her own room here. She's been stable here. I've been helping raise her for 2 years. He exhaled, a sound halfway between patience and dismissal. You're not her real mother, he said. And this is what's best for her. The sentence cut deeper than anything else he could have said. 2 years of early mornings, homework help, comfort after nightmares, reduced to a technicality. So, I said slowly, choosing my words, you're moving in with your ex-wife. For Emma, he corrected. It's temporary, just until she's more settled. And us? I asked. Jason hesitated just long enough for the answer to form without saying it outright. We can still date, he said. You can come by on weekends. We'll make it work. She's fine with it. She's fine with it. Of course she was. And overnight? I asked. He shook his head. Not at first. Maybe not for the first month. Emma needs time to adjust. I nodded once, my throat tight. So, his ex-wife was comfortable with him dating me while living together, but not with me sleeping there. Not with my presence crossing certain invisible lines. The imbalance was almost impressive. You know what? I said after a long pause. You're right. Jason blinked. This is what's best, I continued evenly. When do you want to move? Relief flooded his face so quickly it was almost insulting. Really? He asked. You understand? Completely, I replied. I'll even help you pack. He stood and hugged me, his arms firm, grateful. I knew you'd come around, he said quietly. You're being really mature about this. I smiled into his shoulder. That week, I became the perfect supportive girlfriend. I helped him pack. I organized boxes. I labeled everything neatly. I listened while he talked about how complicated modern families were, how rare it was to find someone as understanding as me. See, he said one evening, wrapping dishes in newspaper, this is why I love you. I nodded. Hey, I asked casually, what does your ex-wife think about you dating while living together? Jason's expression tightened. She doesn't, he said. We agreed, no partners in the house. It would confuse Emma. So you'll both be single, I said lightly, living together. That's different, he replied quickly. It's co-parenting. Of course it was. Moving day came faster than I expected. I rented the truck with my own money. Jason didn't object. He supervised while I loaded boxes, his ex-wife watching from the doorway, arms crossed, assessing. When we finished unloading, Jason walked me back to the truck. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. We'll plan our first date night. I'm looking forward to it, I replied. He kissed me goodbye. I drove away, but I didn't go home. Because while helping him pack, I'd found something interesting. A folder labeled legal documents. And before Jason ever settled into his new co-parenting arrangement, I made sure the truth arrived there first. Quietly. Precisely. Through their mailbox. I didn't cry when I got home. That surprised me. I stood in the doorway longer than necessary, keys still in my hand, listening to the hum of an apartment that suddenly felt too quiet. Jason's shoes were gone. His jacket no longer hung on the back of the chair. Emma's nightlight was still plugged in, glowing softly in an empty room. I exhaled slowly, like my body was recalibrating after holding its breath for weeks. Shock does strange things. It sharpens you, makes everything feel distant and painfully clear at the same time. I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd calmly dismantled our life, and replayed the conversation in my head. Not the words themselves, but the tone, the confidence, the certainty that this was reasonable, that I would adapt, that my role could simply be reduced and rearranged without my consent. That's when the anger arrived. Not explosive, not loud. Cold. I thought about the way he'd said, "You're not her real mother." About how 2 years of showing up could be dismissed with a sentence. About how easily he'd decided I would orbit his new arrangement, available on weekends, invisible during the week. I checked my phone. No message. No, "Did you get home okay?" No hesitation. Of course not. In his mind, this was settled. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, noticing how quiet my own thoughts had become. Somewhere between midnight and morning, something inside me shifted, not into sadness, but into resolve. By morning, I was calm. Too calm. I went to work, answered emails, smiled when spoken to. The normalcy felt surreal, like I was playing a role I'd rehearsed too well. On my lunch break, my phone buzzed. Jason, good morning. I know yesterday was a lot. Thank you again for being so understanding. Understanding. I stared at the word until it lost meaning. I replied simply, of course. That afternoon, I made a list. Not emotional, not dramatic. Practical. What I'd paid for, what I'd contributed, what I'd absorbed without question. Rent, utilities, Emma's school supplies, dance classes paid for the year, groceries on extended weeks, gas, time, emotional labor that never showed up on a spreadsheet. I remembered the folder, the one I'd found while packing. The one Jason hadn't even noticed was missing from the box he told me to handle. That evening, I opened the copies I'd made. Read them slowly, carefully. Custody agreements, financial disclosures, clauses about cohabitation, child support obligations, text messages printed out, careless, candid, damning. It wasn't rage that steadied my hands. It was clarity. Jason hadn't just chosen co-parenting over our relationship. He'd chosen convenience. He'd chosen to keep every benefit, financial, emotional, logistical, while asking me to accept less and call it maturity. That was the moment I stopped reacting and started deciding. The phone rang the next morning at exactly 6. "What did you do?" Jason demanded, his voice tight. I smiled faintly, holding the phone away from my ear for a second before answering. "Good morning," I said evenly. "How's the new arrangement working out?" Silence. Then, "She says you left something in the mailbox." "That's odd," I replied. "I just returned some paperwork I found while packing. Thought it might be important." "What paperwork?" he pressed. "Oh," I said lightly. "Various things. Legal documents, messages. You really should be more careful with sensitive information." His breathing changed. "You went through my things." "You asked me to pack everything," I said calmly. "I was being thorough." He hung up. 10 minutes later, he called back, voice strained now, edges cracking. "She's threatening legal action," he said. "She says I violated the custody agreement." I leaned back in my chair, pulse steady. "Oh," I said, "who could have known?" "You knew," he snapped. "You did this on purpose." I paused. "I shared information," I replied. "Isn't transparency what you said co-parenting was about?" He started shouting. Accusations, betrayal, trust. I ended the call. Because the truth was simple. Jason had underestimated me, and now the consequences were already in motion. The fallout didn't explode all at once. It rippled outward. Phone calls, crossing paths, voices raised in rooms I wasn't in, panic building where confidence had lived just days earlier. Jason called again before noon. This time he didn't start angry. He started careful. "Listen," he said, voice lowered, measured. "We need to talk. Things are complicated right now." I could hear it, the strain he worked so hard to hide. The sound of a man realizing control was slipping, trying to slow the fall by changing tone. "I'm at work," I said. "What's going on?" He exhaled. "My ex-wife is freaking out. She says the custody agreement is very clear about cohabitation. Apparently, us living together while I'm involved with someone else counts." "Involved?" I repeated. "Interesting word choice." "This isn't funny," he snapped, irritation bleeding through. "She's talking about court, about violations." I leaned against my desk, eyes steady. "And?" I asked. "And if this turns legal," he said, "it could affect support payments, scheduling, everything." There it was. Not Emma's feelings, not stability, money. "I thought you said this arrangement was best for Emma," I replied. "Shouldn't that outweigh technicalities?" He went quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was sharper. "You didn't have to interfere." "I didn't interfere," I said. "I returned documents you left lying around." "You copied them," he accused. "I packed them," I corrected. "You told me to." Another pause. I could practically hear him recalculating, trying to find a version of this where he still came out ahead. "You're being petty," he said finally. I smiled to myself. "No," I replied. "I'm being accurate." He hung up without another word. An hour later, his ex-wife called. Her voice was tight, controlled in the way people sound when they're holding a lot of anger just beneath the surface. "Is this information real?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. "Every word." She didn't thank me. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask why. She asked about dates, about records, about whether I had copies. I answered each question calmly, without embellishment. By that afternoon, Jason was calling again. This time he didn't bother pretending. "She's accusing me of hiding income," he said. "Of misleading the court." "That's serious," I replied. "She says you sent her evidence." "I shared documentation," I said again. "What she does with it isn't my decision." "You're enjoying this," he snapped. "No," I said honestly. "I'm done pretending it's my job to protect you from your own choices." That was the moment his anger turned outward. He accused me of sabotage, of manipulation, of setting him up. He brought up Emma, how confused she was, how this stress wasn't good for her. I didn't raise my voice. "Don't put this on me," I said quietly. "You moved her. You destabilized her routine. You decided I was disposable." He cursed under his breath. Then he said something that confirmed everything I already knew. "You could have just stayed quiet," he said. "You didn't have to make this so public." Public. Not wrong, not unfair. Public. That night, his ex-wife kicked him out. I didn't hear it from him. I heard it from a mutual friend who called, half whispering, half gasping. She told him to leave, the friend said. Like, immediately. Bags on the porch. Jason called me an hour later. He didn't yell this time. He pleaded. I just need somewhere to stay, he said. Just a few nights, until this blows over. I stood in my living room, staring at the empty space where his things used to be. What happened to co-parenting, I asked. She's being unreasonable, he said quickly. She thinks I told you things. She thinks I betrayed her. Did you? I asked. No, he said too fast. I mean, maybe I mentioned one or two things, but nothing serious. Sounds like a trust issue, I said evenly, between co-parents. He went quiet. Please, he said. I don't have anywhere else. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. Not because I was tempted, but because I needed to be sure my voice stayed steady. You made your choice, I said. I made mine. You're really doing this? He asked. After everything? After Emma? That name still hit, but I didn't move. You don't get to use her as leverage, I replied. You did this when you decided to keep me as a convenience while rearranging your life. He hung up. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again. A text. You're ruining my life. I looked at the message, then set the phone face down. Because the truth was, his life wasn't unraveling because of me. It was unraveling because the version of himself he'd built, responsible father, reasonable man, victim of circumstance, couldn't survive the truth being seen all at once. And for the first time since this began, I felt something solid settle in my chest. Not satisfaction, not revenge, finality. The silence afterward was heavier than the chaos. No more calls, no accusations, no frantic explanations trying to reshape reality into something survivable. Jason disappeared into the aftermath of his own decisions, and for the first time in weeks, my phone stayed still. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing in the wreckage after a storm, unsure which parts of the damage were permanent. The hardest part wasn't losing Jason. It was Emma. I tried not to think about her room, the untouched bed, the stuffed animals still arranged the way she liked them. I tried not to picture her asking where I was, or worse, being told a version of the story where I simply stopped caring. I told myself I had done the right thing. I repeated it like a fact, not a comfort. Still, there were moments, quiet ones, when doubt crept in. Late at night, I replayed the last conversation over and over, wondered if there had been a way to protect Emma without enabling Jason. If I could have walked away cleaner, quieter. If exposing the truth had cost an innocent child more stability than it was worth. That was the thought that broke me. Not outwardly. I didn't collapse or sob. I sat on the edge of my bed, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor, chest tight with something dangerously close to guilt. Because Jason had been right about one thing. Emma didn't ask for any of this. A few days later, the message arrived. It wasn't from Jason. It was from an unfamiliar number. She keeps asking for you. I stared at the screen, pulse spiking. Another message followed. Her school counselor thought you should know. I had to sit down. The counselor called later that afternoon. Professional, measured, kind. She's allowed to write letters, she explained, as long as they're appropriate and shared with both parents. If you're comfortable receiving them. Comfortable. My throat tightened. Yes, I said quietly. Of course. The first letter arrived 2 days later. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Careful, uneven, determined. Dear my name. Mom says you don't live with us anymore because you're busy. But I don't believe that. Do you still remember our secret handshake? I miss pancake Saturdays. Love, Emma. I pressed the paper flat against the table, my hand steady even as something cracked open in my chest. Jason had told her I didn't love them anymore. Of course he had. I wrote back that same night. Slowly. Carefully. Every word chosen with intention. I kept it warm, but neutral. Affectionate, but safe. I copied the counselor exactly as instructed. Dear Emma, I'll always care about you. I remember our handshake perfectly. Sometimes life changes, but the good memories don't go away. Keep being curious and kind. I'm proud of you, your friend. I read it twice before sealing the envelope. Jason found out anyway. He called the next morning, voice sharp, furious. You're undermining my parenting, he accused. You're confusing her. You moved in with your ex-wife while dating me, I replied calmly. I'm writing supervised, appropriate letters to a child I helped raise. See the difference? She doesn't need you, he snapped. The lie came too easily. She misses stability, I said. So do you. He hung up. That night, I opened social media for the first time in days. Jason had posted, not directly about me, not by name, just vague accusations about betrayal, about people who punish children to make a point, about fake loyalty and selfish motives. The comments were sympathetic, uninformed. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, not with anger, but with something heavier. I could stay silent. I could take the blame, or I could tell the truth. My hands hovered over the keyboard. This was the darkest moment, not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew once the truth was out, there would be no going back, no reconciliation, no softened version of events. I posted one screenshot, just one. Jason's message calling me useful. No commentary, no insults. Just the truth. Within an hour, his post was gone. So was his narrative. And as I shut my laptop, the weight in my chest shifted. I still missed Emma. I still hated how this ended. But for the first time, I knew I wasn't carrying guilt that belonged to someone else. The truth has a strange gravity. Once it's released, it pulls everything else into alignment, whether people are ready for it or not. Jason wasn't. The screenshot spread faster than I expected. Not virally, not dramatically, but efficiently. Quiet messages started arriving from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Mutual friends, acquaintances, even someone from his family. Is this real? Did he really say that? I'm so sorry, we had no idea. I didn't respond to most of them. The point wasn't to convince anyone. The truth didn't need my help anymore. Jason called that night. He didn't start with anger. He started with damage control. You had no right, he said, voice tight but controlled. That was private. You made it public, I replied. You just didn't expect receipts. You're ruining my reputation, he said. I let the silence stretch. Jason, I said finally, you ruined your own reputation the moment you decided I was a resource instead of a partner. He scoffed. That's not what this was. Then explain, I said calmly, why you thought it was reasonable to live with your ex-wife, keep me financially involved, and still call that a relationship. He didn't answer, because there wasn't one. The next call didn't come from him. It came from his ex-wife. Her voice was different this time, not sharp, not defensive, tired. The court's involved now, she said. They're reviewing everything. I figured, I replied. He didn't disclose all his income, she continued. They're not happy. I closed my eyes briefly. That's between you and him, I said. I didn't create those documents. No, she agreed quietly. You didn't. She paused. I won't pretend I like how this came out, she added, but I appreciate the honesty. That was the closest thing to closure I expected from her. Jason's situation unraveled quickly after that. Temporary living arrangements became unstable. Legal fees stacked up. His carefully curated image, responsible father, reasonable man, collapsed under documentation he could no longer explain away. And suddenly I was no longer the problem. I was just the witness. The turning point didn't come with celebration. It came with distance. I stopped checking my phone compulsively, stopped replaying conversations, stopped justifying myself in my own head. The noise faded, replaced by something steadier. Control. For the first time since Jason sat me down at that kitchen table, I wasn't reacting to his decisions. I wasn't bracing for the next fallout. I was choosing what stayed in my life. The counselor called again later that week. Emma's doing okay, she said. She misses you, but she's adjusting. Can I keep writing, I asked. Yes, she replied. The court believes maintaining positive connections is in her best interest. Jason protested. Of course he did. But this time it didn't matter, because his voice wasn't the only one being heard anymore. That night, I packed away the last of his things I'd been avoiding. Stray papers, a forgotten hoodie, a spare charger. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. Each item went into a box that I sealed and labeled, ready to be returned without conversation. When I finished, I stood in the middle of my living room, breathing evenly. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was done. The power Jason thought he had over the narrative, over my role, over how this would end, was gone. Not because I took it from him aggressively, but because I stopped giving it to him at all. That was the real turning point. Not the screenshot, not the legal consequences, not the public shift in perception. It was the moment I realized I didn't need him to acknowledge anything for me to move forward. The truth had already done its work, and I was finally free to step out of the story he'd been rewriting without me. Consequences don't arrive all at once. They arrive in pieces. Court dates, quiet judgments, logistical inconveniences that add up to a life no longer functioning the way it once did. Jason felt every one of them. The first shift came from people he thought were firmly on his side. Friends who had nodded along to his version of events now asked questions he couldn't answer without contradicting himself. Invitations slowed, Messages went unanswered. The social insulation he relied on thinned until there was nowhere left to hide. Legally, things moved faster. His ex-wife filed motions citing undisclosed income and violations tied to the living arrangement he'd insisted was temporary and for Emma. The court wasn't interested in his intentions, only the paperwork. Deadlines appeared. Lawyers got expensive. The narrative he'd built collapsed under numbers and signatures. Jason tried to pull me back into it. At first, it was subtle. "Can you clarify something for the lawyer? You were there when we discussed." "This wouldn't have gone this far if you hadn't." I didn't respond. When silence didn't work, he escalated. "You owe me," he said in a voicemail I didn't answer, "after everything I let you be part of." The wording said more than he realized. I blocked the number. Emma's situation stabilized slowly, but not without cost. The court took issue with how abruptly she'd been moved, then moved again. Her routine had been disrupted, and responsibility landed where it belonged. Jason's claims of being the stable parent rang hollow when compared to actual outcomes. The counselor kept me informed when appropriate. "She's resilient," she said once, "but she's noticed who disappeared and who didn't." That stayed with me. Jason's financial strain became impossible to ignore. He downsized, sold things, complained, to anyone who would listen, about unfair systems and vindictive people. The irony was sharp. He reached out again through a mutual friend. "He just wants closure," the friend said gently. "Maybe an apology." I shook my head. "He wants relief," I replied, "not accountability." The friend didn't argue. Jason's ex-wife never contacted me again. She didn't need to. The court handled what I never could have without becoming someone I didn't want to be. I focused on rebuilding. Not dramatically, not symbolically. Practically. I reworked my budget, removing expenses that had quietly become obligations. I reclaimed weekends. I stopped planning my life around other people's instability. The apartment felt lighter without the tension of anticipating the next compromise. The letters from Emma continued. Less frequent now, but still warm. I answered each one with care, never crossing boundaries, never undermining her parents. Just presence. Just honesty. Jason hated that. He accused me of winning. But this wasn't a victory. It was accountability playing out exactly as it should. One evening, months later, I ran into someone who used to see us together often. "I always wondered how you stayed so calm," she said. "I didn't realize how much you were carrying." I smiled faintly. "I didn't either," I admitted. That was the quiet truth of it. Jason lost the future he'd tried to juggle. The arrangement, the safety net, the illusion that he could extract support without offering respect. I lost a relationship, but kept myself. And as the fallout settled into something final and undeniable, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't miss him. Not the man he was. Only the version I'd hoped he could be. 2 months passed. Not dramatically, not ceremoniously, just quietly, like healing often does. Jason faded into the background of my life, the same way he'd once pushed me into the background of his. There were no more messages routed through friends, no surprise calls from unfamiliar numbers. Whatever storms he was still dealing with, they no longer reached me. Emma's letters slowed, then stopped. The counselor explained gently that she was focusing on adjusting to her new routine. That was okay. I told myself that loving someone didn't mean holding on forever. Sometimes it meant letting go without resentment. I kept every letter she'd written me. I didn't need reminders of Jason. I needed reminders that what I'd given was real. Life, once unburdened by constant compromise, settled into something steadier. I slept better, ate better, planned without factoring in someone else's instability. The space in my apartment and in my head felt intentional again. People asked if I regretted it, if I thought I'd gone too far, if exposing the truth had been worth the fallout, if I wished I'd handled it more gently. The answer surprised even me. No, because I didn't create the consequences. I didn't exaggerate or manipulate. I didn't punish anyone. I stopped protecting lies that weren't mine to carry. Jason wanted everything, his ex-wife, his child, my support, my money, my silence. He gambled on the idea that I would always be understanding, always accommodating, always secondary. He lost that bet, not because I was cruel, but because I was done. The lesson wasn't about revenge or cleverness or winning. It was about clarity. If someone tells you that you're not essential, believe them. If someone asks you to shrink so their life feels easier, walk away. If someone uses responsibility as a shield to avoid accountability, let the truth through. Love isn't proven by endurance alone. It's proven by respect. I didn't leave with satisfaction. I left with self-respect. And that turned out to be more than enough. If you've been in a situation where you were asked to give more while being valued less, you're not alone. Thank you for listening, for sharing your time with this story. If it resonated with you, feel free to comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps keep these stories alive.